We'll let the last couple stragglers come in, and then let's get started. Welcome, everybody. My name is Chris Tavares. I'm a program manager on the Browser Programmability and Tools team. With me is my lovely assistant, Chris Sells, who is also a program manager on the Browser Programmability and Tools team. If you're interested in a position with us, our first question is your name Chris? So we are here to talk today about WinJS, the Windows libraries for JavaScript. WinJS is the JavaScript story for taking advantage of Metro-style apps. So can we have the next slide, please? So what are we going to talk about? What is WinJS? Then we're going to walk through a series of examples of building an application, which is going to expose some of the capabilities of the WinJS library, and then we're going to look at how it's surfaced in the Visual Studio templates. So before we get too much further, I just want to take a quick poll of the audience. How many of you consider yourself, I don't want to put this, fluent with modern JavaScript programming? Maybe? Okay, cool. Woohoo! So I don't have to spend a whole lot of time with the details of where the semicolons go.
Great.
This makes life easier.
You'll tell me, though, right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
All right, so next. What is WinJS? WinJS is a pure JavaScript library which provides an implementation of the Windows Metro style for JavaScript applications. It gives you the standard set of controls that you've already seen in many of the talks already. It gives you the style sheets to get the right font sizes and the offsets and margins and make things look nice according to the Metro style. It also provides implementations of the touch interface, so you don't have to implement that yourself. We also supply some implementations of useful helper methods and patterns in JavaScript, which typically rely a lot on conventions in standard JavaScript programming. And finally, the other thing is it is designed for easy toolability. Next. Okay, so what's in it? Well, here's kind of a list of the major pieces. Like I said, we have some helper functions for common patterns around defining namespaces in JavaScript and defining constructors. Promises is our async pattern, which you've already seen examples of. We're going to go into more details on what that is.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
How many folks here were in Luke's talk right before this one and saw promises? Okay, so a bunch of people have already seen promises. So
Okay,
that's good.
Okay, cool. App model, navigation, and fragments are all around building an application, not just a web page. Binding, controls, animations, templates are all about building a very rich and alive with activity UI. And then finally, we have some utilities and default CSS styles. You know, those aren't actually JavaScript, of course, they're CSS, but they are considered part of the WinJS library. Let's go next. So let's just dive in. Chris, if you would be so kind as to run Visual Studio and give me a blank project. Let's start at ground zero.
What should I call that blank project?
I don't particularly care.
I don't particularly care.
Okay. Grind, grind, crunch, crunch. All right, so what do we have here? Well, we start with a fairly basic HTML file. We have a few references to, we start with a reference to UIDark, which is one of the CSS files. By the way, if you want the controls to look like the Metro style, you will need to use either UIDark CSS or UILite CSS. Then we have...
Where do the files come from?
So the files are included in the project. Actually, could you zoom in on that?
Sure.
And quit your instant messenger, please.
You're absolutely right. That's my fault. Please forgive me.
Alrighty.
There we go.
There we go.
Once I learn what the keystrokes are.
Okay.
Perfect.
So as you can see, you got a directory for your CSS file, any images you're using, a default JS file, and then WinJS, that's the directory where the WinJS libraries end up coming up, or included. So you end up with both UIDark and UILite in your project. The template's default to UIDark. If you want to switch, all you got to do is change your reference in your link tag to pull in UILite instead. And then if you pop open JS, there's the files that make up Win.js. We're going to be pulling in different ones as we go along. The first thing you should know about Win.js, this is a library, not a framework. And it is designed to be pay-as-you-go. So you only need to load the pieces of it that you're actually using in your application. Now, the VS template will put them all into your application by default so that they're all there for you. But you can, as you go along, you can decide whether you actually need those and either delete them or reference them.
And so we actually are only bringing in the bare minimum here
Yes.
in the blank template.
Yes. So base.js gives you the bare minimum, the object helpers and the promises and a couple other small things. And www app is our application model. Let's look at how we use that. Go over to the default JS file, please. OK. So as you can see, the template gave us is using the standard JavaScript module pattern to get local variables so we don't pollute our global namespace. And then, as you can see, we also hook up Win.js.application on main window activated. Just like any other web page, Metro-style apps in HTML5 are highly event-driven. So your code starts running, you hook up to an event, and then you wait for those events to come into your application from the browser and you handle them. So in this particular case, we're hooking into the place where your application starts, the activation event. There are several ways that your app could get activated. Launch is the default, being it was launched from a tile. It could get launched from a search. It could be launched from a share contract. Now, in this particular case, we don't really care how we were launched, since this app we're going to build isn't going to be doing any of that stuff, so we can just delete that code just to get it out of the way.
Sure.
OK, so let's go back to the slides. Next. So wrap up. What did we just see? The app model, really pretty simple. You start up, your HTML loads, your script executes, you hook up to events, and then you wait for them to come in. Pretty straightforward.
So there was one line of code we didn't talk about.
Ah, yes. Thank you for reminding me. Now, Win.js application, under the hood, actually queues up events. This is actually primarily built this way for testing purposes. Now, so what will happen is you load www.js into your HTML file. It will hook up to all of the appropriate WinRT activations and DOM content loaded in a few other browser events. And it will start receiving those events, but until you call start, it will actually put them into a queue and not actually dispatch them to your code. So you will need to remember to call start at the end of your default JS, which is already in the...
But the benefit of that is that we can make sure that we don't miss any of those events.
Yeah, you can guarantee you're not missing any. It's also useful because you can manually queue events as well. So if you were writing, for example, a test for startups, you could clear out that queue all of the startup events, start it, and then watch the events be handled in your test. All right. So let's go on. Okay, promises. So some of you have already seen this. I'll give the spiel again. So asynchronous processing is a necessity in JavaScript. JavaScript has always been a single-threaded environment. With web workers coming, this will help with some of that work, but the UI is always going to be single-threaded, and web workers are fairly heavyweight, so you don't want to do trivial work on a web worker. In the JavaScript API, there's two primary patterns that are used to define how you tell the system, I have asynchronous work I want to do later. Set timeout is the canonical example of the first style, where you pass a callback function as a parameter. So you call set timeout, you pass the callback, and then after 500 milliseconds, that callback will be invoked. Now the second pattern is the event handler pattern. Here on these slides, I've got an image tag. I hook up to the load event on that image tag, and then I set the source property. After the browser is finished downloading that image, it will fire the load event, and then my callback function will work. The WinRT at a raw level actually follows this event handler pattern as well. This works. However, Every async operation, you got to look up the docs. Is it using the callback pattern? Is it using the event handler pattern? If it's using the event handler pattern, what events do you hook up to? What order do they get called in? And it is also a real pain in the neck if you're trying to do more than one async thing, or you try to do one, then another, then another. They don't compose well at all. We are certainly not the first to discover these issues, and the JavaScript community has been working on a more composable, common, standard async pattern. And so we have followed their lead, next, with the idea of something called a promise. A promise is an object that you can say, I want to do something when you have a value for me later. We are actually following a specification from a common JS community, the promises/aspec. It is really quite a simple specification. You have an object. It has a method on it called then. The then method can take up to 3 parameters, each of which is a callback function. First parameter is completion. The second parameter is if there's an error, it will get called. And the third parameter is progress. Other JavaScript libraries also implement this. jQuery has something called deferred, which is the same basic idea. Dojo has promises. Node.js has promises. Other libraries are doing the same thing. So the idea is we provide an implementation of promises, but as long as we follow the patterns, our promises will interact with other promises, and it all just works together.
So that means if I were to bring in one of these third-party JavaScript libraries into my Metro-style app, that our promises would compose with theirs.
That is the idea. I can't promise it depending on the basis of yes, based on the it will depend on the specific details of the implementation of that third party. All right, so let's go actually use this. So we're going to go out and, it's not really a JavaScript demo for not doing HTTP requests. So we're going to start by going out and, we've got a lot of news from the conference, so let's go and build a news reader. We're going to grab some data from, a Windows luminary, Raymond Chen. Now, normally, you would do XML HTTP request. The object's been around for years. People know it. It's rather convoluted to use. So we have a wrapper called WinJS XHR. You got an extra level of quotes in there.
Yep, I see it.
So WinJS XHR, you can pass it an options object. In this case, we're just passing the URL. WinJS XHR returns a promise. When the promise completes, then we know we've got our data back. And in this case, it came back as it's passed to the completion function as a parameter. So actually, before we go too much further, we're going to walk through that XML and pull the data out and put it into our DOM. We need a place in the DOM to put it. So let's go back to default HTML. There we go. Inside the body, just throw a div in there, give it ID of content. There you go. Close it. Oh, important safety tip for those who are new to this. Div cannot be an empty tag. You can't just say / angle bracket. It's always got to be.
So actually, one of my favorite parts of our new language service is that you can say div blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. And then when you just type, it'll do the right thing. Mm-hmm. Likewise, if you say image, it'll also do the right thing. Right? I love that.
All right, so our object is the response that you get back from HTTP request. So let's dig into that HTML a little bit. So we're going to need to go var items equals r.response XML dot select nodes / item. There you go. This is just a little bit of XPath. We're just using the XML DOM. And then we're going to need to go grab that content div for me. Document. There we go. All right, now let's do a loop over the items. And this is where I really wish the W3C had added the for each method to the DOM API. Length, yep. I less than len.
Length, the standard pattern, which is very long-winded.
Yes, and necessary.
Yes.
Okay, Whoa. OK, so we're going to get the item. Yep.
Great.
Let's just get the title of the blog entry. So the way we're going to do this, go item dot select single node. Quote title dot text. There we go. All right, and throw it in H2, I guess.
Sure.
Let's create an H2 element. Set our inner text on that thing to the title. I do that all the time.
Yep. There?
Yep, and append it to the contents. Child, OK.
Cool.
And now, if we run this thing,
Thank you for that special effect.
voila. We've gone out to the network using a promise. We have retrieved Raymond's display of knowledge.
Perfect. Well, and this is just his recent knowledge.
Yes, just his recent knowledge.
His knowledge stretches far
Yes,
back in time.
yes, it does. All right, so that's all well and good. It's worked. Of course, I'm sure we're at a conference with 5,000 people all hitting the same Wi-Fi network at the same time. Or I'm sure some of us in the room have had the experience of the interaction of a fiber optic cable and a backhoe. Networks are unreliable. Things will fail. So we need to be able to handle failure here. If we left it alone and there was a failure, the net result would be nothing. The completion handler in a promise is only called on completion, successful completion. So let us simulate an error. Let's go to blogsmsdn.mom instead of blogsmsdn.com.
My mom would be so happy.
Yep. Now, in order to hook up a error handler, we pass a second parameter to the then function, and it's going to receive the XML HTTP response error results. I mean, we don't really need to dig into that. That's just the standard thing. So could you just display a message in our DOM? Oh, you have to look up content again.
Oh, yes, thank you. My mom's way into the emoticons.
Yes. There we go. Sorry, Mom. We did it really, really small because we don't want to make Mom all that sad.
There, we'll zoom in.
OK, there we go. All righty. So back 2 slides. What did we just see? Whoop. There we go. So to summarize, what did we just see? Promises has a then method on it. You pass a completion function, which is called on successful completion of the promise. If there's an error, you can hook a second parameter, which would be the error handler.
Great.
OK. So that's pretty low level and infrastructure-y.
Very.
Yes. Is that a word?
Infrastructure. I think you just made it a word just now.
OK.
Well done.
So let's look at some of the more visual stuff, the idea of a WinJS control. Next. HTML, of course, does have a lot of things that you would typically think would be called the controls. You've got text boxes, buttons, check boxes, all that stuff. They're very full-featured. They're standard. Everybody knows about them. However, the contents of controls in the browser is a fixed set. You cannot.
But even so, right? I mean,
Yeah.
the controls that we ship out of the box, right? The HTML ones have been styled to work well with Metro Style apps, so we should, they're okay to use.
Yeah,
yes.
they're absolutely okay to
Right.
use. However, they are, the set is fixed. They are also fairly primitive. Many times you will want to aggregate multiple controls together, or even just reuse behavior. The classic password box. You've got a username field, a password field, and a login button. You really want to implement that over and over and over again. So we have defined something called the WinJS control model. It's actually quite straightforward. The idea is there's a JavaScript object you attach to a DOM element. You can then implement anything you want in that JavaScript object, including dumping more DOM in, or hooking up event handlers, exposing your own API. Controls can be hooked up either declaratively or programmatically, and our control model is also toolable. It works really well in Expression Blend.
Cool.
So next. So here's a quick slide showing most, but not all, of the controls that we ship with Win.js. Several of these, buttons, checkboxes, combo box, that's actually just the plain old HTML elements. However, as you can see here, we have styled them so that they look good according to the Metro guidelines, and more importantly, they are sized and bordered so that they play nicely with touch. Fingers are bigger than mouse pointers, and you need to make sure you have enough room. So this will give you appropriately sized buttons, for example, out of the box. We also have other controls, the grid view, list view, flip view, ratings control, that provide additional functionality by providing the code that compose existing DOM elements in new combinations. So let's go next. Alrighty, so let's start by, actually, let's go into Blend.
Okay.
I just right-click there, open an expression blend. Grind, 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 crunch, crunch, crunch. Okay, oops. Yeah, we should probably fix that. Although it was interesting, just to note, where did that text come from? That's not in my HTML. Blend is actually running your application under the hood there. So it did and see, here it's pulling out our data for our HTML from our XML HTTP request. So this is a really nice way to actually see how your application is going to render not just from the raw HTML, but actually as a result of your code as well.
And also, this is very important if we're building extensibility controls as executable JavaScript. For us to actually be able to see the controls,
yes.
we need to execute the JavaScript. So
Okay.
Blend is doing a very important thing for us here.
Yes. All right, so actually, could you zoom in on the assets panel on the top there?
Sure.
There we go. So we have a list of all the controls that we currently supported in Blend, that we currently have available in our project. A lot of these, button checkboxes, this is just going to drop in an existing control. Tell you what, we had made a comment about Raymond having much
His
wisdom
knowledge,
over many years.
Yes.
But this is the internet, so is really anything older than 2 years really worth looking at anymore?
Well, actually, based on this conference, anything before 2 days ago, really?
Yeah, maybe.
It's
all right.
all new.
Let's add some filtering so that we can only look at the new stuff.
Okay.
All right, so, yeah. All right, so what I want you to do, go grab a date picker. Actually, drag that into the live DOM tree, not on the artboard.
Okay.
Just so it ends up in the right place in our UI. Okay. Boom. No, it's stuck at the bottom anyway.
I should be able to solve that problem.
You should be able to. Right. There we go.
Cool.
Voila. Here's our date picker control. And you see on the right, if you could zoom in on the attributes tab. Okay, so we have the CSS properties that we can set on the date picker to style it however we want. Yeah, the winning thing, insert Charlie Sheen joke here.
Winning.
Yeah. Click on the attributes tab. This gives us the programmatic interface that the control itself has exposed. And if you scroll down a little bit, or actually, no, it's right there. So notice that it's min-year, max-year fields. Those are custom properties that the author of the date picker has added. So you can set, so let's set the min-year to 2009.
Great.
There we go. We need to have some history after all.
Okay.
All right, so let us look at what Blend did to our HTML. So if you hit the, that guy, that'll give us the split view. This lets us look at the artboard on the top and the HTML down at the bottom. And notice all it did was actually it added a div. Okay. And then it added these two attributes, data-win-control, data-win options. Data- is the standard mechanism that has been defined by HTML5 for extending HTML elements with additional data. Anything that starts with data- is okay as far as HTML validators are concerned. we have chosen data-win-to-control as a marker saying this is a declarative control. At this point in my DOM, I actually want a date picker, not just a plain div. Similarly, data-win-options is letting me set declaratively what the values of those particular parameters are that I want, since they're different than the default. Now, of course, this data-win control is just data. It doesn't actually do anything. So we're going to need to run some code which will walk through the DOM tree looking for that data-win control and actually newing up, in this case, the date picker. That call is winjs.ui.processAll, as you can see. Blend added it for us. And thus it is able to display. Unfortunately for our needs, it put it in the wrong place.
Because, of course,
yes, it does not know our needs, so it's trying to put it in a place that it can find it.
I'm not trying to make excuses for blend. It just doesn't know we care about when this event is done.
Right.
When this code is done.
Right. So, I mean, right now, with script type equals text JavaScript, it's just going to run immediately. We really don't want this to run until after our DOM has finished loaded and we're in the middle of activation. So why don't we save this, then go back to VS. Whoa. VS automatically detected that there's been a change. All right, so let us, okay, we're going to leave that there, take that script tag out. And we want to do this actually before we do the XHR call. Probably not like that.
Not quite like that.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay, now, WinJS process all is actually asynchronous. So you get a promise back, and then if you need to know when WinJS process all is done, you hook up a completion handler. So what we're going to do here is actually move the declaration of the content variable above the process all. I'm also going to take the opportunity to demonstrate chaining of promises. As I mentioned, composition. So what we're going to do, take the call to winjs.xhr and put it inside the callback from process all. Not the whole thing, just the call to winjs.xhr.
Okay.
Not just up to the that. Okay. Put that in there. Return that. Now, so the return value of the then method on a promise is another promise. Here, since we're returning a promise from the completion function, that becomes the return value of the next promise. We can then chain them together. So now I can say, okay, I want to do process all, which is asynchronous. Then I'm going to do XHR, which is asynchronous. Then I'm going to go read my feed.
And so this is as opposed to nest.
Yes.
We can just do promise.
Yes, much better, I think. I find it much easier to read, if nothing else. All right, so now we have a date picker on a screen. Shall we run this and just prove that it's there? Oh, and fix the dot. Oh, you did fix the dot.
Oh, I
okay.
fixed the dot.
All right.
I'm way ahead of you.
Okay.
It's not my first time.
Yeah. All right, so we have a date picker. It'd be kind of nice if it actually filtered something, wouldn't it?
Well, we did put a little minimum here.
Oh, okay. And as you can see, it's there.
Oh, yeah, that's right. It doesn't go before 2009. It does go to 2111, however.
This is called future proofing. All right, so having a control on the screen all by itself is pretty but not particularly useful. Let's actually hook up to that control and do something useful with it.
Great.
All right, so we're going to need to put in some filtering. So we probably need a variable to filter against.
Okay.
So let's start just above, right there. Just put var app state. I can see getting a couple of these in here. So,
okay.
And we'll say what kind of min date?
Min date.
Colon, and we'll just say new date 2009, comma 0. Yes, that's January 2009. Then when we do our little loop, we should get the publication date of the item. It's inside the loop.
Inside, yes, there.
Okay, so it's var pub date equals, in this case, it's going to be item.select single node. pubdate.text. All right, now, of course, it's actually text, which isn't going to help us, so wrap that in a new date call.
Great.
Okay, and now we can, before creating the H2 and appending, we can say if pubdate greater than appstate.minDate. There we go.
That.
Yep.
So that's our filtering logic.
That's our filtering logic right
Cool.
there. So the other thing we're going to need to do is probably set that min date when we change the date picker.
Oh, sure.
So before we do the WinJS XHR call inside that response function, we need to go and get the date picker control. Actually, did we have an ID on that div? We're probably going to need it.
This one.
Yeah, just throw an ID on there.
Great.
Okay. All right. So if we do, any of the DOM search, by ID for date filter, that's going to give us, in fact, the div, not the control. We want to get to the underlying JavaScript control object so that we can manipulate that API. So the way we do that, as Chris has just shown, you grab the WinControl property off the DOM element. Part of the contract of control is when you create it, it will add this WinControl property onto any DOM element it is attached to. So now that we have that, we can then hook up to the change event. So it's add event listener.
Do we care?
No. We're not actually going to be using the event args on this one.
Great.
All right, and we can set the min date, or set appstate.minDate equals date filter current. All right, I'm going to ask you to do a little bit of refactoring now.
Ooh.
Because we now need to reload our data based on our filter. Refresh, just call it refresh.
Good.
Okay, and then we can pull the...
And that's all of this, right?
Including the WinJS XHR call.
This. That?
Yep.
Oh, except we need the error handler.
You need the error handler as well.
Do we get that? I think we're missing
You could call refresh there.
that.
There we go. Book. All right. Get rid of the semicolon.
Now it's just this, right?
Yep. Okay, and then we need to call refresh once from the from after we hook up the event handler.
That.
There we go. Now we run this guy. Da, da, da. Okay.
Oh, we did what we always do.
We forgot to clear the contents of the...
Yes.
Oh, actually, you lost your content variable too, so...
We did.
Here we go. Content.inner HTML equals nothing. There we go. All right, so... Okay, so set that to... Yeah, actually go back to 2011. Okay, now if you go to the day... There you go. Just go down. There we go. As we see, we're getting newer items as they come in. So we are now filtering based on the contents of a control.
Cool.
All right. Back to the slides. Okay. So the declarative control model, you put in a DOM element in your HTML. You add the data win control attribute, the data win options attribute, which is appropriately enough optional for whatever standard settings you want. You have to call WinJS UI process all before you actually use the control. And then from that point, when you want to get access to it, you use the win control property on the element. Now, the other part on this slide is at the bottom. We did not show this in the demo in the interest of time. That is the programmatic model. You can, once you have the element, just call new control name. Pass it the element in the options record, and so if you want to do that in code, you can do that as well. It is all fully supported and fairly straightforward.
And in fact, all WinJS UI
process all is doing is calling new with control. Okay. So next up, data binding. Microsoft is famous for reinventing data binding with every UI stack, and it wouldn't be a new UI stack if we didn't do that. So WinJS does include a data binding engine. Basic idea, we have some data in our JavaScript. We want it to show up in our UI. The WinJS data binding system is one-way only. From data to UI, we have not included any data binding right now. From UI back to data.
And so when you say one way, that means as the data changes, the
UI will update it. Correct. The data binding system is asynchronous in that if you make a change, the notifications actually go out slightly later. The big advantage of that is we also include a feature called coalescing. If you change the same data 15 times, you will get one change notification, not 15 of them with all the intermediate values. Binding can be done programmatically or declaratively. Again, in the interest of time for our demo, we're going to do the declarative binding. So let us start by, sure, it would be nice if we showed the name of our feed at the top of the page, don't you think?
Sure.
All right. So let's give us a place to put that. Put an ID on that. Yeah. Header. Okay, now we're going to add our declarative data binding attribute here. Before we had data win control, now we have data-win-bind. Then we add what we call a binding expression, saying the left side is the target attribute, and then the right side is the source attribute. So when we do binding, we're going to say, what's going to happen is we're going to hand it an object, which is our data context, and it's going to be looking at the context for a title property, and then at bind time, it's going to update the inner text property with that value.
Cool.
Pardon me. So let's go back to default.js. Let's set this up. So the way we do this, the way we hook it up, before we needed WinJS UI process all to hook up data win control. Data win bind has an analogous function, WinJS binding process all. Before we do that, go back to the HTML. We need to pull in the binding system.
Ah, yes.
And actually, also while we're there, let's rearrange our script tags a little bit.
Sure.
The UI needs to be before binding.
I haven't added UI.
You did. Blend added it.
Yes. That.
Yeah, and I think you might need to move controls down below binding as well.
Great.
There we go. Okay. Now, so we're going to need to call WinJS UI or WinJS binding process all. We're going to have to wait until, we probably should wait until process all is finished, UI process all is finished.
Okay. So you want to do it inside here?
Yep.
Great.
So, whoa, slow down.
Sorry, I got so excited.
We need to tell it what we're binding.
Ah, yes.
So let's start with, we need to tell what element we're going to start with. There's two methods here. There's process all and process. The difference is that process all, you give it an element and it walks that element and all the elements down within all the children of those elements. Process by itself just processes the single element. Now, we just have a single element, but we'll use process all anyway just for future proofing. So go grab the element we want to process.
Can we just do the whole thing? Can we just do...
We could say document.body as well.
Okay.
Come on. I can do it. There we go.
There we go.
All right, and then let's pass in our app state object.
Oh, great. The thing that we've been building up.
Yep. Let's add a default title on the app state, just so we have something before we have data. So title equals no feed loaded yet, or no feed yet, or something like that. Okay. And then in the refresh method, We get the response. Let's grab the title of the feed out of the response. So our is going to be r.response.xml, select node, select single node. As we / channel / title dot text. Okay, now set appstate.title equals feed title. Okay, run it. Well, something happened because we got the no feed for you default text, but that's not the name of Raymond's feed. So we obviously missed a piece. Here's the trick. Binding requires that the object you are binding to is what's called an observable object. So we're going to need to make our app state object observable in order to have the binding notification fire on the reset. The easiest way to do that, there's a function called winjs.binding.as. So when you create the app state variable to begin with, just wrap that in a winjs.binding.as. That will give us, that will take our object and it will add onto it all of the change tracking and notification and binding system so that when we later set app state title, change notification will fire. So let that go.
Ooh,
and voila, we now have data binding changing the contents of our HTML. We can go one step further.
But wait, there's more.
There's more for the low, low price of. So what did you think about writing that code that generated those H2s to fill in the
I was unhappy writing that code,
I
have to say.
figured as much. And imagine how much more unhappy you would be when your boss or somebody said, oh, well, we have this designer who came up with this great big HTML stuff, and you have to write all the code.
Yeah, that would
Let's not do that.
Pleasant, yeah.
Yeah. So what we have is something called the binding template. So we can actually define HTML that will be generated when we bind data, and then render that template. So, yeah, Chris is going to create another div. A template is a control. So we say data win control equals, in this case, winjs.binding.template. And then inside there, we can define the HTML we want generated. Okay. So we can put our H2, put the data win bind attribute on it. So what are we doing? Inner text, colon title.
Title.
And while we're at it, let's add the date so we can actually see when some stuff was published.
Oh, so this should just be like a paragraph.
Paragraph, and actually let's get a little fancier.
Ooh, really?
Yeah. So put in some paragraph text, and we'll put a span inside the paragraph, which is actually getting bound.
Ooh.
So you can say published on. And put a span. There we go. Give it the inner text pub date. All right, so we're going to need to tweak our code a little bit. So we're going to need to get our template control. So just like we did before, we get the element. .win control. Right. And then we're going to, inside our filter loop, we can then call template.render. Okay. We need to give it the object to render, so it's going to need an object with a title and a pub date property.
Well, luckily we happen to have one of those lying around.
Well, we don't yet, but we can construct one really fast.
Yes. Title.
Title?
Title.
No, just title.
Oh, thank you. Oh, that's right. We don't have
and pub date.
Pub date.
And then pass second parameter is content, which is where we want the template rendered to. And you can get rid of the rest of that.
So it's just going to take that template and fill in the data.
And stamp it into the DOM.
And then it's just going to append child.
Yep.
We could have done that before.
Yes, we could have.
Ugh.
But you wouldn't have appreciated it so much now.
I do appreciate it.
Boom. And see, we have our dates on there now.
And the filtering works
And the
too.
filtering still works.
Ooh. Awesome.
And if we want to tweak the display of these things, now we can spend most of our time working on the template and figuring out the data to be generated and not have to write a whole lot of DOM generation code.
I love that part.
Yeah. But wait, there's more. So let's take it one step further. I'm sure everybody can guess that displaying a list of data that from a rendered template is going to be a fairly common thing to do in an application. So there are, in fact, controls that do this. So the one we're going to do, we're going to pull in a list view control. And we're going to need an ID on that as well.
Okay.
View. So we're going to also add a data win options, set the layout.
Okay.
Call it LD or something. Yeah, there we go. Data win options. Curly brace. Layout, colon. Curly brace. Yes, this is a little ugly. Type, colon. WinJS.UI.listLayout. Not new. Yeah. Basically, what this is doing is telling the list view that I want it laid out in a flat list, not a grid like the start page is set up.
And in fact, the grid is the default, which is why we're doing
yes.
this. Right.
We'll also need to bring in the list view code. So we need to add a script include for UI collections. UI collections.
Right.
Collections.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Oh, and bring in animations as well.
Oh, that's right.
That's another one we always get wrong.
And the beauty of that is that list view gives us all kinds of beautiful animations that we didn't have before for free.
For free. All right, so now what we're going to need to do is, tell you what, let's, instead of explicitly rendering the template,
Okay.
Let's collect those items into an array. Or call them posts or something like that. Yeah.
Great.
Equals. And then we do post.push, that thing.
This.
Yes. All right, so now we've got our items. Let's go grab the list view control, set our data source. The .win control.
Oh, thank you. And the data source is what?
Posts, our array of data.
So we're telling the list view.
Here's what I want you to render. We need to do one other thing, which we actually didn't do. We could have done this in data win options, but let's do it here. We need to set the item renderer so it knows how to draw those things. Because otherwise, it's just going to go, I don't know, and it's going to get something really ugly. So it's item renderer equals, and you have the template.
Yep.
Okay, now one little quirk with the list view. With the template, when you specify an item renderer, you need to give it the element, not the control. It's a quirk. So you're grabbing the win control in that template.
Yes, thank you.
So take that out.
Great.
Now we run that guy. And notice right now, there's a scroll bar now, which we didn't have before. Chris, you have a touch machine, right?
Oh, I do. Ooh,
see? All touch lined up. Click on touch one of the items. We get the, just touch one of the.
Look at that cool animation. Before it was just flashy.
Yeah, touch one of the items. Boom. Notice it highlights. All that stuff just by using the list view control.
That's pretty cool.
Yep. Alrighty. So let's go back to the slides.
Gesundheit. Someone's allergic to the list view control.
Oh, yeah. Well. So, data templates. We have a template control. You specify the contents, and then you call the template render method to draw those with a particular data item. Next.
And in fact, I mean, we took out all our manual template rendering, but wasn't the list view doing the exact
List view does the exact same thing?
It was just doing it in a fancy way.
Yeah. Declarative binding. Remember, you have to make the things you're binding to observable. So by calling WinJS binding as on your data, you then get an observable object with the same fields, and then when you set the properties on an observable object, it will update. You need to call WinJS binding either process or process all to actually hook up the declarative binding syntax. Next. Programmatic binding, again, we didn't show this in the interest of time. One of the other things WinJS binding.as does is it gives you an object back that has a bind method on it. So you can hook up not just the UI through declarative binding, you can hook up a function that says whenever this property changes, go call this function. You get the new value, you get the old value, and you can do whatever you want. All right. So for our last topic, we're going to talk about navigation, building a website, web pages, classic browser navigation. You load up a bunch of HTML, you have a little bit of script, you click on a link, you go over here, what does the browser do? Well, it dumps everything, gets rid of all your state, loads the new page. This is really good for scalability of server-side stuff, but it makes state management a real pain in the neck. You end up having to serialize all the state you care about, remember to serialize it, it's got to go up to the server, get encoded in the URL, something like that. As AJAX-style applications have gotten much more popular, now we do, those applications typically use single-page navigations. The browser, as far as it's concerned, is staying on a single URL, a single page. It's keeping the script engine and all the variables in the current state, and you manipulate the DOM programmatically rather than navigating the entire browser. Next. Metro-style apps, we fully expect that you will be using the single-page navigation model. It just makes the state management so much easier.
Now, Chris, if I wanted to in my Metro-style apps to use multi-page navigation, I could.
You certainly could.
But,
you can.
But for, I believe Jensen has a special word to describe apps like that. Oh, I remember, crap.
Yes. However, the single-page navigation style does have another bit of pain involved because single-page navigation means a single page of HTML, especially if you want your designers to work on this stuff. They're going to want an HTML file. They're not going to want to be able to write that DOM code. They're certainly not going to do it. Don't want to maintain it.
Yeah, we didn't want to write it.
Yeah.
They're not going to.
And we wrote 4 lines of it. So we need a solution for this problem while still keeping the single-page navigation paradigm. I think that's my vocabulary word for the day.
Nice.
Okay, so we have the idea of the fragment loader. The idea is really pretty straightforward. We want to have separate physical HTML files that we can work on individually, have their own pieces of script that they can load, that we can design separately. We can work on them as individual pieces, but we want to be able to easily programmatically load that chunk of HTML and drop it into our DOM programmatically. So the fragment loader provides us with that capability. Now, bringing in the fragment loader is going to be a little bit of a leap and more code than we really want to write by ourselves. So let's actually step into the VS templates.
Great.
Let us run let's create a new project or run a separate copy of VS, whatever. Let's do the split application. This is one of the VS templates for one of the standard the standard Metro-style UIs. You want to just run this real quick?
Sure.
So you can certainly see this is something that for an RSS reader we're kind of aiming for eventually anyway. We've got our list of items in the feed on the left. We've got the actual feed information on the right. And notice we have that back button on the upper left-hand corner. If we hit that, okay, we get our list of feeds that we're subscribed to, and then you can navigate to those. So let's just do a little quick surgery and hook our data up to it, and then we'll look at how it's actually navigating. So let's start with the split page JS.
Oh, category? Want to start with the category?
We can start with the category?
I like starting with the category.
Okay. So all we need to do is, each one of the templates provides some dummy data in them at the bottom. So we're just going to replace that with our own dummy data.
Actually, this will be, this won't be dummy data, right? This will be our list of feeds, right?
Yep.
That's good data. That's smarty data.
Yep, so we got Raymond's blog there, and then a couple other blogs by a couple of hacks.
Right.
All right, now let's go over to split page JS, and let's replace the code that is pulling up out of the dummy data. And so, okay, so this read feed method is doing basically the same thing we were doing before.
We're pulling out the channel title and the
pulling out some information in the item. We're also pulling the actual feed, the actual text of the item as well.
Great.
Now, if we run this guy, we should be all wired up. Boom. We got Raymond's blog, and we click on things. We can scroll around on the right. Well, except that one's short. Let's hit the back button. Okay, then we have our feeds. And select one of the other feeds. Boom. Yeah, this guy's really got to post something new. I don't know what he's doing, but.
Great.
Okay, so let's look at how this actually wired itself up together. So the magic is all in the default JS file. How did you bring that dialog up, Chris?
Control comma.
Control comma.
Huge fan.
Okay. All right, so there's two major pieces here. There is the navigation toolkit, and then there's the fragment loader. The navigation toolkit exists because, I said, you're not going to want to really navigate your browser, but you still kind of want to keep track of a logical location in your app. So the navigation toolkit is really just a data structure which keeps track of a backstack and gives you events when things change. So here, Chris is showing how you invoke the navigation by calling WinJS navigation navigate. You give it a destination, a location, and an arbitrary data object about that location that can then be used for whatever purpose you want. The location here, notice it's a string. It is an URL here. That's a very common pattern. It does not have to be an URL. If you want to do more sophisticated routing in your application, you are welcome to pass whatever you want. The system doesn't care because the navigation framework is not actually navigating your browser. So in order to use this, we need to hook up to the events in the navigation system. So if you go over to default.js, please.
Before, I would just want to make sure I understood this before we moved on. So this item invoke function is called when I click on one of the RSS feeds on the first page. And then all I'm doing is calling the navigate function, passing in the name of
where you want to go.
Where we want to go, right? And notice, right, we have two pages here, right? The category page and the split page. Each of them is a fragment to be loaded by the fragment loader.
Correct.
Great. Thank you. Now I understand.
Okay.
And then, of course, the beauty of us not doing multi-page navigation is we can just pass around objects. We don't have to serialize this into JSON and pass it as a string and blah, blah, blah. We're just passing the
object or
object.
And it's still in memory. You don't have to serialize anything.
Yeah.
You could
the script context, we're keeping the script context.
Exactly.
Great. Cool. OK, so you were saying?
In default.js. So actually, before we get there, get to the bottom.
Yes.
OK. There's the trick. WinJS navigation, add event listener. One would think we were following the same pattern specified in the DOM API. This add event listener all over the place.
Yes.
So there's 3 events you can hook up to. The ones you generally care about, navigating and navigated. One happens just before you navigate. One happens after you navigate. So we've hooked up to the navigated. Go up to the navigated method. All right, there's the magic for the fragment loader. WinJS UI fragments.clone. So what this is actually doing, you hand it a URL and some arbitrary data. The URL, the fragment loader then goes out to the URL, starts pulling it down. This could actually go out over the web if you have the right permission set. So it is, therefore, asynchronous. The completion function you get back is passed a DOM document fragment object, which contains the HTML DOM that was loaded. Then from there, you can do whatever you want. And this piece here should look pretty familiar. We find the place in our DOM where we wanted our content, and we slap the fragment in, boom, and then we have the data that we loaded from our fragment into our DOM.
And where does this content host object come from in this particular case?
It's in default.html, actually. You scroll down a bit. Oh, there it is. It's just, this is going to be a fairly common pattern you will see in your Metro-style apps, that your default HTML actually doesn't have a whole lot in it. It's going to have your app bar definition and a big old div called content or something along those lines, where you actually are swapping fragments in and The fragment loader is fairly sophisticated about how it handles things like scripts. So you can do script references in fragments, and it will make sure the same script doesn't get loaded more than once, for example. You can load CSS in fragments as well, and so that all works.
Cool.
All right, and we are just about out of time. Let's just finish up our slides. So here, this is another variant of the fragment loader. You can say fragments clone to, and then after it's done with the fragment load, it will actually stick it into the DOM for you at the location you give it. Using the navigation framework with the fragment loader, as we showed. So let's wrap up. Windows library for JavaScript, known as WinJS. All right, it's the core programming model for Metro-style applications in JavaScript, and it is designed to give you the Metro-style app with a great user interface, good looks, great touch support, all that good Win8 stuff.
So now you just said something. It's the core programming model. Should I think of WinJS as wrapping the WinRT? How do I think about that?
WinJS is providing a supplement to the WinRT.
I see. So it's WinRT plus plus.
Yes. Yeah, we have a general design approach that we do not wrap the WinRT unless absolutely necessary, and there are very few cases where we found that absolutely necessary.
So you will just use 98% of the WinRT directly in your Metro-style apps, and then this is just a little helper for various.
Right. So this is giving us things like the HTML controls,
right,
which is not something the WinRT can provide.
Great.
All right. So there's a variety of related sessions. One could argue, since WinJS is the fundamental piece of JavaScript, that every JavaScript session at Build is related to this talk.
But we would never argue such a thing.
No, it never would.
No.
So thank you very much. Now go play with it, please, and let us know.